All right, good evening. It's 7 o'clock, and that means it's time for Life, Love, and Lessons. You know, we all know children who seem to lack the ability to think before they act, grabbing toys or doing other things and mean stuff that sometimes invokes fear and irritability in other children, and yet they always promise they'll be nice again. Well, the truth is, adults suffer from impulsivity too. In fact, it might be hidden behind your good social skills or even behind closed doors. But if you have a tendency to be too impulsive, it can sabotage your relationships, affect your career, and even endanger your physical health. Tonight, we're talking about impulsivity. Welcome to Life, Love, and Lessons. Let me introduce you to our host. We have Dr. Ish Major, world-renowned psychiatrist and host of WeTV's Marriage Bootcamp, among other things. We also have Lynn Toler, judge longstanding on divorce court, and she's also a co-host on WeTV's Marriage Bootcamp, and there's a lot of impulsivity there. And so when you need to calm things down a bit, and you need a little bit of light and life in your life, welcome Alyssa Gruber, psychologist, change maker, meditation healer, and Zen specialist, also an author. I'm Louisa Eyler. I'm a TEDx speaker, a college professor of human behavior, and a licensed therapist. Tonight, we're talking impulsivity. And so, you know, I really thought we always like to just go to Judge Lynn to kick it off because she's really in touch with all of her fans and she sees a lot of stuff in the world. And I was wondering if you could just kind of help us out with, why do you think it's so hard for some people to control themselves?
You know, it's very interesting. I don't think people are emotionally aware. I think people go out, they have thoughts and beliefs, but they don't have a true understanding of how they feel. So when something happens to you, it bypasses all your thoughts and beliefs and goes straight to how you feel. So depending on what I say to you, and if I nick you somewhere where you're weak, I mean, boom, pow, you know, and emotions, you know, they're fast, but they're sloppy. And you know, when a tiger comes in, you jump, you don't have to, well, it's a tiger. What should I do? It goes right to your emotional center. You get up, you do that. And I think that a lot of our stuff goes right to our emotional center and we respond immediately. And I think therein lies the problem with impulsivity, because you don't understand the emotional component that we bring to everything that we do.
Yeah, I saw something you posted on Instagram earlier this week about really being mindful to keep it together when the world's falling apart. And I think it was a great tip from your mom. Do you want to share that?
My mom just said, keep it together. There was, I don't know what was going on. Mama was always telling me something, but, I was going to fall apart. I was 20 years old and I was falling apart for some reason. And she looked at me and I reached out because I was going to hug her because I was looking to fall apart. I mean, just fall apart. And she said, no, I don't care what it is. I don't care why you feel that way. I don't care what's going on in that head of yours. Whatever it is, it's not going to be helped by you falling apart. So whatever we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is keep it together. You know, she could have just comforted me, but she decided to teach me instead.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happening. You know, so many things are happening at once. It's like we're keeping it together in one area, but then it's falling apart in another area, and it becomes like this tightly knit ball of yarn that's just getting unraveled, and it doesn't even know where to go. And you know, it doesn't always have to be bad, but sometimes maybe being impulsive is a good thing, you know, and then other times it's sort of up and down and it really affects relationships. You know, Dr. Ish, how does impulsivity affect relationships?
Well, to your first point, yeah, sometimes your impulse can be a good thing. I think we get confused between instincts and impulses, right? So one thing is very proactive, the other thing is very reactive, right? We all have this impulse, right? Have you ever, you know, usually we have when we're much younger when it's this case. You know, I think, wow, I'm really good at this thing and I really like doing this thing. Something tells me I should just try to do it and try to make a living, right? That's a good instinct. That's a good impulse to follow. Then the world teaches you, yeah, probably not a lot of evidence for that, so we don't follow it, right? And so another example, let's say you got the impulse to reach out to a friend. Wow, you know, I've been thinking about this old friend of mine all week. I hadn't reached out, hadn't talked to them in years. Let me just send a quick text to see how they're doing. That's a good impulse. Follow that, right? That is your instincts talking to you, you know, kind of on a whole nother level. Same person, same device, now we're going to have an impulse that you shouldn't follow. You know what? I text my girlfriend 20 minutes ago. They hadn't texted me back yet. You know what? Let me pick up this phone and let me call them for the next 5 minutes, for the next 3 hours, just to see why this, right? That's a bad impulse. Don't follow that one, right? One is proactive. One is very reactive. And I think the idea is everybody's really just trying to feel better, right? But we get confused as opposed to what's going to actually do that. And like Judge said, reacting in the moment and what's really not going to help us achieve that in the end.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and do you think that like when you want something more than anything else and then you crave it so much and you just want to be able to do what you want and then you get stubborn and you can't take no for an answer, and it's almost like a form of thrill seeking, like, you know, being so in the moment that you're not going to be inflexible at all and you're not going to stop until you get what you want?
Yeah, it's like, and we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of that over these last 4 to 5 months because of this humongous existential threat we've all been facing and don't know how to control. And we're going to talk about some of those impulses that go way wrong a little bit later when we talk about some of those impulse control disorders, for sure.
Yeah. Alyssa, you're shaking your head because I think you understand that patience, above all things, is really one of the things that's needed to choose wisely in life. What are your thoughts for today on setting the intentions for, you know, really being related to pulse and impulse?
Yeah, I want to touch on something Lynn said, which is basically this notion of reacting versus responding. And Dr. Ish talked about that too. There is a time when we are so blinded by our emotions that we are reacting. We're not responding. We're not being intentional. We're not being thoughtful. We are not thinking of consequences. We're simply acting in the moment to ventilate some of those overwhelming feelings, okay? The other thing I think is important as we set the tone tonight, and I'm just going to put a pin in this one, is the notion of instant gratification. A lot of impulse behaviors are just about feeling good or feeling different in the moment. And sometimes that moment is not worth the cost down the road. So I think intention is a really important word. When we're intentional with our actions, we really have put some thought into not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it and what the consequences will be, not only for ourselves, but for the people around us. Because if we're all just consistently acting on impulse, like, I don't even know what that would look like. That would get ugly so fast. So I really think intention's a great word to really talk about pulse versus impulse. Where's the intention?
And so, in looking at that, when you look at the statistics, right, a lot of times there's co-occurring disorders, like somebody's not only impulsive, but they've got a lot of other things going on. You know, maybe it's an addiction, or maybe it's, you know, another form of, you know, some type of mental health illness. And the statistics are 81% of people who have some type of impulse control disorder have also experienced trauma, 71% reporting physical abuse, 68% reporting sexual abuse, and 62% recording witnessing serious violence that have also led to their impulsivity. So when we look at all those things that go into that, you know, Dr. Ish, what exactly are impulse control disorders? And, you know, are they features of larger personality disorders?
I think so, yeah. They really are. The thing that's from a psychiatric, from a treatment provider standpoint, when you got somebody with an impulse control disorder, there is really no question of what you got, right? You know it when you see it. It's a very obvious thing. I had a kid who had impulse control disorder, and for the first 2 or 3 visits, we couldn't get the kid from the car in the parking lot into the clinic because he would run into the street. And so we would literally all be in the parking lot trying to rally this kid just to get him in the clinic. That same kid, first week, rode his bicycle off of the roof of their house, broke his arm. 2 weeks after that, that same kid rode his bicycle off the top of their house and cracked his head. And I'm talking to him, I'm like, well, what's going on? What made you do it? Forget about the fact that it was a phenomenal feat of engineering just to get the bike to the rooftop in the first place. What was going on that made you want to do it, not once, but twice in a row? And the kid simply looked at me and said, it felt great, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to understand what is an impulse control disorder, the best way to understand that is to understand what some people consider the opposite end of the spectrum, which is OCD, right? So if you're thinking about OCD, which I am a card-carrying member, right? You've got this thing that you feel, right, that we feel compelled to do, right? Whether it's an action or a thought. I've got to count to 20 3 times or something bad is going to happen. I've got to check this door lock at least 5 times before I go to bed and make sure to keep something bad from happening, right? So that's OCD. We do this repetitive behavior or thought to keep something bad from happening. When you talk about impulse control disorders, they're doing this repetitive behavior because they want to feel good. They want the good feeling to come, right? And so that's one of the characteristic differences, regardless of what types of problems it causes, right? So when we talk about impulse control disorder, we're talking about things like pathological gambling, kleptomania, folks are stealing a bunch, trichotillomania, that is hair pulling to the excessive amount where folks will have patches of hair missing in their head. It looks like they have some kind of rash, but they're just pulling it out. We're talking about intermittent explosive disorder, outbursts of aggression and assaults towards folks. People also kind of want to lump Tourette's into that category, but it's a little bit different. We're thinking about pyromania, right? Folks who just set fires just because they want to enjoy the blaze, right? Pathological skin picking, compulsive shopping, or compulsive sexual behavior. And so the hallmark of an impulse control disorder is, again, we're all trying to feel good, right? But what's the vehicle we're going to use? For the impulse control disorders, it is a vehicle that is not only going to cause you problems, but it's going to cause other people problems, and you feel compelled to do it anyway. And so there's a lot going on there. There's a few different things we use to treat it when it comes to medications. Obviously therapeutics, it's very closely related. Some people think it's very closely related to bipolar disorder when folks are kind of running on high and just doing the things that help them feel good. And so we use a lot of mood stabilizers. We use some SSRIs, in particular, Nafenil has been pretty helpful. But some of the kids, some of the younger kids, some antipsychotics are really helpful just to kind of put the fire out. And then we can help them start to use that executive functioning part of their brain, that frontal lobe part of their brain, where they can sift through negative and positive consequences. If I do this, then this happens. So a lot of times, Judge talks about a lot just in relationships, taking a pause. A lot of times it's just being able to take a pause and say, okay, yeah, but if I set that tree on fire, then what? And then you can kind of think through the rest.
That's brilliant. I really want to say great job on describing that. And Louisa, I just want to mention, and so we toggle back, you mentioned the comorbidity with trauma. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to say that a lot of individuals who've been exposed to trauma, had traumatic experiences, they don't know how to self-regulate. So what does that mean? It means that somewhere along the way, the systems that help individuals sort through their overwhelming emotions were short-circuited. So a lot of impulsive behaviors happen in the moment simply because the individual cannot bear the feelings that they're feeling. And so you might have somebody who is a survivor of sexual assault or abuse who later in life seems confusing from the outside. They're very sexually active, they're doing high-risk behaviors, but in fact, they're just trying to escape the ever-present feelings. And the impulses seem much more reasonable than dealing with the interior world. So I think it's important to know that, like, this isn't just somebody being irresponsible.
Right.
In some cases, especially with drug use or gambling, a lot of these are self-soothing impulses. Right. Even though they come out sideways and are dysfunctional, I think the intention psychologically is people don't have the capacity to soothe themselves normally.
Yeah, and that's very important, because some folks also think it's because that pleasure center in your brain, that reward center, is firing on all cylinders. It's overactive, right? That nucleus accumbens, the thing that lets you know things feel good, that part is on 10, and so it's just trying to figure out a way to how do we tamp that down and take it down to a 5, where you can kind of think through it a little bit. So that's part of the biology behind it too.
Yeah. That's a good point, Doc. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Judge Lynn.
I'm just gonna say, I want to talk about impulsivity from my point of view, which was on the bench when I would putting people in jail all the time. You guys see clinical things. I see regular people who can't control themselves. Do you know what I mean? And it's like,
Uh-huh.
by the time they come into court after having hit him or hit her, and they have a reason by the time they get there, they got an explanation for me, but they had time to wrap up their stupid in an explanation. And what I saw as my job was, while I was on the bench, is to unwrap the explanation and get to, I got mad because he called me out my name. I got mad because, and that's 3 minutes of anger, a year in jail, and try to juxtapose how you felt and what you did. The cardiologist that cried on the witness stand because he had told the cop that he was a doctor and he felt that should get him out of the ticket. And I said, well, were you rushing to the hospital? Was somebody dying, having a heart attack? No, but I'm a doctor. And
Right.
then began to cry. And he didn't have impulse control problems, but that was an impulse. I mean, it was just like,
Wow.
that's what gets you. And I think that everybody needs to really believe that they are subject to the ravages of impulse.
Judge, let me ask you a question.
Prisons are full of them.
Judge, let me ask you, so in court, in that moment, as you're unwrapping the stuff for them, how many of those, what would you say was the percentage of folks who, after you unwrapped it for them, were able to say, you know what, you were right? How many of them got it, and then how many of them just kind of went off and were like, still confused?
When I was first on the bench, I'd said very little.
Yeah.
By the time I got off, I think a good third. And I think it was a good third because my mother came in and told me what I was doing wrong when I was talking to the defendants. You can't challenge what they did as far as you were wrong and blah, 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 because they're there and they're waiting for that.
Yeah.
But
Shields up.
if you start with, I don't know what, she kept talking, didn't she? Would you shut up, would she? And she wouldn't let you leave, would she? And so then what, and then he thinks I'm in his head. So he's talking to me and with me about, yeah. And then I just hit her. Now let me tell you where you went wrong. The impulse was, I gotta stop her.
Yeah.
But, and then you start where they are and you slowly walk them home.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about impulse control disorders and really making it in very simplistic terms, in sociology, we talk about if a tree fell in the woods and no one heard it fall, did it make a sound, right? So if you're all alone, you're doing things that maybe serve you or that are autocorrect, or the impulse is there because it's, helping you compensate for some trauma. If it's not hurting anyone else and it's serving you, is that still a disorder?
But it may be hurting you though, right? I do some impulsive things that I clearly ought not be doing.
Mm-hmm. I think all of us.
And it's just, the fact that I, when I get nervous, I take scissors to my hair, Yeah.
So I think, that's the main thing. So right, Judge, if the impulse to take the scissors to the hair affects your life to such a degree that you get some negative feedback from it, right? You get an outside check, then you're going to be more inclined to check that impulse the next time, right? And so from my end, it's a problem once it starts affecting your life in a negative way, right? If it's affecting your relationship, if it's affecting your job, if it's affecting your money, okay, we got to do something about it, right? There are some kids right now who are just twirling their hair, and they're going to pull out a few strands. It's not going to affect their life, and it's going to help them feel better in the moment. Go with it, kid. I'm going to teach you some other skills on top of that in the meantime, right? But if you're talking about, somebody who's a kleptomaniac, they got to steal stuff. Yeah, at some point you're going to get in trouble for that. And so we got to do some things different. But there are some things that, and Alyssa can speak to this too, that we call ego-syntonic and ego-dystonic. There's some things that you can feel and do, and it's going to be right in line with who you are. It's not going to hurt anybody. Keep going with it. But then there are going to be some things that ultimately they're going to lead you. It's a slippery slope, right? So if you do 2 of a thing, no problem. But if you do 10 of it, then we may have a problem. And
Could
so
you explain those terms again? Egos.
Yeah. So there's such a thing like so when we're talking about personality disorders, right? It's ego-syntonic, and then there's something that's ego-dystonic. So if I have the thought that I've got to do everything perfectly. I've got to have my sweater perfectly steamed, and I've got to have, you know, myself perfectly put together before I can get on this call with Judge and Louisa and Alyssa tonight, right? That if that's something that helps me feel good, right, and helps me go about my what's egocentric, it ain't bothering nobody. It's just helping me show up best
I get it now.
But if it's causing me angst, if it's causing me anxiety, if it's causing me stress, if it's making me mad by the time I show up, and then I'm going to blow back some of that stuff, well, now that's that's disruptive to my sense of self and to the people around me. So some things can help move you along the way, and some things are going to stop you in your tracks. You got to figure out what that is.
And I think a really key point there is also, we don't always see our own behaviors clearly.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Jeff, you said something so smart. Like, you had to, by the time they got to the courtroom, they had an excuse. Like, we're really great Monday morning quarterbacks about our impulses. And the smarter we are, the better we are at justifying them if the outcome didn't turn out how we thought. So like, we're all really super slick. We are Wile E. Coyote when it comes to justifying our impulses. So Louisa, like, yeah, it's okay to have some impulses that are harmless, but I just worry about the compiling of harmless impulses, because there's always a tipping point. Like, you can't just shop on impulse forever and have it not catch up with you. You can't impulsively, you know, kiss people and just not have one incident go bad, or speed through traffic lights. Like, eventually it all does compile. So I think to give ourselves a break, like if you want to do your makeup, I did before the call, that worked for me. But if I'm literally bereft and feel insecure and ugly and miserable and cry myself to sleep and am comparing myself because I didn't like the way I looked, I have now stepped into a totally new zone. And I want to go back to something Dr. Ish said, which I think is really important for, especially for those who have a spiritual life. Instincts and impulses are not the same thing.
Right.
You're sometimes going to have this little voice inside of you. And if you haven't refined that voice, you might not even know where it comes from, but it says, you know what, go do this. Call your friend, take a chance, you know, go try this new thing. That's very different than saying all of a sudden at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, I'm going to learn how to drag race my car. Like, those are very different things. And again, it goes back to that intention. If you have your intention clear before you do it, you don't need to come up with excuses for why you did it afterwards. So I really think it's a sequencing thing too. And let's also parse out, it almost like I feel like I'm the space between Lynn and Ish. There are people who have a psychiatric disorder that is pathological to their life. And there are other people who have impulse control issues that harm their lives, but they're not egregious. Like, the person who's speeding has a very different situation than a young child who is really setting fires and putting his very life at risk all the time. So there is a space between, there's a spectrum. So I think it's important to know that, like, just because you might speed through a light, that doesn't necessarily mean you have an impulse control disorder. It means in that moment, you might be struggling with some of your impulses and making good decisions. So I think there's that space between that's important to sort of highlight on the spectum.
I do feel bad for your cardiologist you had on the stand, though, Judge. That's a rough time. You know what I mean? look, full disclosure.
I mean, he was bawling.
I understand. I've used that excuse only about 20 or 30 times. Half the times it works, half the time it doesn't. I never cry about it. I just keep moving.
You know, that's what you're doing wrong. Maybe you need more tears.
Well, that's a good point, though. And that brings us to a really good question, which is, you know, when others around you maybe seem like they're being ridiculous or, you know, seemingly out of control, I mean, does going to court or getting some, you know, punitive, you know, monetary punishment or jail time, you know, do you think that that really solves it? And like, when you have people, you know, who are all around you being ridiculous, what do you do?
Absolutely not. I think America's love affair with the punitive measures in the judicial system is a sad, sad thing. I mean, it's like Law and Order. Like, we see successes. He got 25 years instead of the 15. You know what I mean? It just, and we have a carceral society where it's just like, well, you know, the judges and prisons are supposed to be for that rare, extraordinary event. And it should not be where we house all of society's social ills, but it has become that. You know, the war on drugs, what a stupid thing. You pull all of the people out of the community, the men out of the community, and you create more drug problems. You solve by doing that. They're not doing drugs because they're bad people. They're doing drugs because that's what they do to soothe themselves in the moment, as a function of, you know, it was always the way that, you know, how opiates are. They talk about that now as, oh, it's a problem. It's not a criminal thing, you know, but you had black people in the hood, you know, it was a crime, but it was never a crime. And you've got, there are so many drugs, people with mental health problems in jail, in prison, you know, domestic violence, all of that, social ills that we need to solve, instead of, we feel too comfortable with that, well, we caught him and we put him in jail. As if, you know, you kill your girlfriend or something, we put him in jail. We've solved nothing. And the problem should be that the 2,000 women every year die killed by their domestic partner, and that the man that you're in love with is the most dangerous person in your life, statistically. So we need to solve that problem and not think of, well, we caught him, as a solution. I'm a failure. My job is to assemble the failures and parcel them out, because I don't fix anything on the bench, not a thing. The failure has already occurred, and to think, you know, getting justice is a resolution, and it's not.
That's a high number. I didn't know 2,000 a year.
2,000 a year, U.S.
Wow.
That's not the number that's going down. That's what's terrifying. With all our awareness and all our big talk, we have a systemic problem, because not only are women beholden to situations that are difficult, they are literally tied to situations that can be deadly.
Right.
That's a sociological issue. That's an economy issue. That's a race issue. This is not something that's improving. So I think that when we're talking about impulse control disorders and some way to remedy the fallout from them, we really need to be talking about mental health.
And jail doesn't solve that. You know, if you're mad at your girlfriend, you're not thinking about the consequence. And jail does not solve that. You have to uproot the underlying causes of, you know, self-esteem and fear and control that would allow you to put yourself in a circumstance where you would perpetrate that kind of violence, as opposed to saying, if we punish it correctly, we will stop it, because clearly that is not the case.
Yeah. I was just going to say that's a really good point. And I've toured several of the historic prisons in the U.S., including the Eastern State Penitentiary, when they talk about when they start removing you from the source of your crime or whatever it was that you did, that, you know, the time and the sentencing would correct it. But we know very well that the time isn't going to do anything, right? It's just going to allow time to pass. So Dr. Ish or Alyssa, or, you know, even Judge Lynn, when you think about living with someone or being near someone, and maybe even starting to recognize to yourself that maybe something that you're doing is harming others, you know, what are some of the first things that you can do to kind of, you know, either be able to live with someone with an impulse control disorder, or maybe check yourself before you wreck yourself and really understand if there's anything you can do to help yourself?
Yeah, I think Judge touched on it in her first segment when she talked about just being aware, right? Most of us aren't aware how the thing we're doing is affecting us, right? We're trying to feel better in the moment. So yeah, for the next 5 minutes, I felt a little bit better, so I did it. And then we're really not aware of how it's affecting others. So I think the best thing you can do if you're living with somebody, you know, or somebody's close to you every day, is just point it out. Just simply by making them aware. Hey, you know what? That's an interesting thing you do. I wonder if you ever thought about that. That's just point it out. Just let them point it out. I grew up, there was 7 of us in the house, 9 with mom and daddy. And so that was one of the things we always did well for each other. We would point out our little quirks and our little weirdness. Like, hey, you know what? Why do you do that thing every time before you walk upstairs? That's interesting, right? And you think about it, like, you know, if you come up with a good answer, keep on doing it. But if not, then you checked it right then and there. So you've got to have someone who can point it out to you in a compassionate way, right? With empathy, not in a shaming, not in a guilt-laying way, but just in a compassionate way. Hey, you know what? That's interesting. Have you ever noticed that you do such and such and such and such, right? I wonder what's up with that. And then go from there. That's one of the first best things you can do.
Well, and I think, I was just going to say.
Yeah, so one of the things also I think is important to really remind ourselves and remind others is that other people are not medicine. What do I mean by that? We are not in this world to use or abuse other people to feel better about ourselves. Other people are not medicine. So it is not the responsibility, nor is it appropriate to look to other people to help you feel less rage or, you know, give you that instant gratification that you don't seem to be able to engineer on your own. So even when we're leaning in during this time of isolation, like, I think it's important to monitor what we're actually offering and receiving. Like, really calibrate that. Really, like, look at ourselves and take accountability for our own behavior and where we're out of control. And even if those are little microaggressions, like, stop them before they get bigger. Because everything, like we said before, compiles. So, like, it starts small. Not everything starts with a punch in the face. You know, sometimes things start with a tone or impatience or a slam door and starts to escalate. So I think it's really important to notice if somebody in your household has escalating behaviors or if you have escalating behaviors before you reach a complete boiling point. Like you said, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Like, I'd say, like, start checking yourself if you even think it's possible you're going to wreck yourself. Like, be really proactive.
Yeah, Alyssa, is there some very simple, conscientious way that you can do that? You know, really understanding the difference between desire and action, and then what's authentic and actually, like, thinking that you are aware that you're doing it versus just sort of lying in that subconscious place where, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I did that. Like, how do you regulate that?
I mean, I think it's hard. I think it's a life lesson for most of us. But if you ask yourself before you start doing something how you feel, that's probably a good place. So if I'm okay, like, I feel okay and I'm managing myself well, and then I have an impulse, it's probably a healthier impulse than if I'm totally out of control and anxious and depressed. Like, decisions made in the moment when we're feeling anxiety or depression or anger typically are not our most clear-headed decisions. So a good decision Monday, my mom used to say, is a good decision Thursday, is a good decision next Monday. Like, ask yourself, like, can this wait? Like, this urgency, because that's what impulse feels like. It feels like I'm doing it now. I'm not waiting. I'm not going to wait a second. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want, whenever I want. And that is now, and I want it yesterday. What's the hurry? Like, toggling and asking yourself in that moment, like, where am I and what's my hurry?
Right.
The two concrete things you can just ask yourself: where am I and what's the hurry?
Well, and that goes back.
I was going to say, you want to put as much distance as you can between the thought and the action.
That's right.
That's what you want. You want to have as much space as possible to allow a little space between the urge and the action. My dad, you know, when I was a kid, I was a loquacious child. I talked a lot, right? And so some of it was great, some of it was garbage. But my dad would say, son, if you think three times before you speak once, you might be right, right? And so when I was going off on a tangent, he would say, hey, think 3 times before you speak and then see if it's right or not. And so that just, he gave me a little space between the urge just to blurt it out and the action of actually speaking the words. And so that's one of those things, you know, Alyssa, it's over the arch of your lifetime, you're going to learn how to do that. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
And let me just add.
There's also clues. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to add a little plug for meditation. That's when people say, like, what's the point of meditating? What you're doing with meditation is you're building in impulse control. Yep. You're taking a feeling, and instead of acting on that feeling, you're just letting the feeling ride and returning to the breath. So when people say, like, I can't meditate, what's the point? Research has shown in at-risk communities, introducing meditation to education for young children reduces violent crime and improves testing and reduces anxiety and depression symptoms in those kids. So if we're just teaching little kids to learn how to sit quietly with all their feelings and all their antsiness and all their impulses, just to sit, even for a few minutes, we're priming them for the rest of their lives to have a better relationship with their impulse control. It's fascinating research. Yeah, really amazing. So, Judge Lynn, sorry.
Yeah, I want to know, Judge Lynn, you said you have a clue. You said it's like a clue. What were you thinking?
Remember.
Oh, you started to say it's a clue. That was what you said.
My mother I used to have an impulse problem with getting people told. And my mother one day said, you know, whenever you say, let me explain something to you, I need you to stop, because that's your go phrase. When you say, let me explain something to you, you about to get ugly. And I need you to listen for that. You know, we all need, you know, listen for that, because that's your go phrase. And we were talking about it. My dad, who was bipolar and stuff, damn it, Tony, God damn it, Tony. That was his go phrase. And my sister and I would listen for that at night when he came home. Because if the door closed and we didn't hear that, you can go to sleep. But if your door closed and you listen, you hear God, you go out and you intercede. But if you watch yourself and pay attention and debrief your day, you can see patterns in your own behavior where your impulsivity and your proclivities all pop up and do things without your knowledge or permission.
Well, yeah, that's exactly a good point, because in the chat, there's actually some questions that talk about when does it become like a conditioned response, right? Like it happens so often that when you hear that go phrase, then your automatic impulse just kicks in, and then you're almost acting subconsciously, and it's just so repetitive that you don't even realize anymore that you're in this cycle and that it's occurring. So it's all very relative. And Judge Lynn, I just want to say, you know, your feel, think, do, it's monumental, because in behavioral conditioning, you know, there's 1, 2, 3 magic, there's stop, think, and decide. But in reality, your feel, think, do, it's just the most basic, but yet the truest form of that's what it is. And if we add on.
Yeah, and I put it in, and the way I write feel, think, then do, in that order and with that emphasis.
Yeah.
On the think.
And Dr. Ish would say you've got to say it 3 times before you even speak. And then it would make it full circle that you've actually like kind of brought it all together. You know, and I think that people underestimate like how important the ability to control your impulses is. I mean, even something as simple as the ability to resist the urge to scroll on Instagram when you might have needed to not have more input into your life, and you might have just needed to be still with yourself and know what you're doing, instead of having that impulse gratification of finding out what everybody else is doing, right? And so when we think about that time that maybe we need to take a minute for ourselves, we know that, you know, as we round out this portion of the show, we always want to say, can we feel, think, and do 1 minute of just concentrating on us? So we'll give it to Alyssa for our mindful minute.
Okay, so 1 minute. Let's think about our breathing right now and how to slow ourselves down. So if it's comfortable, close your eyes. Notice all the things that crop up. The impulse to fidget, the impulse to respond, the impulse to scratch or to think. Just notice. We're just getting to know ourselves. And when those impulses to open our eyes or to fidget happen, just breathe through them. An impulse is just that. It's a fleeting firing of the brain, and we don't have to act on every impulse. The breath is there to guide us and to slow us down. Breathe in deeply. Hold the breath at the top. Exhale and open your eyes.
That minute is going by faster these days. I got it. Because the first 2 days you did it, it was unpleasant.
Yeah, and so I've been thinking a lot about that, Judge Lynn, and I think I've got it figured out. You know, Tony Robbins and all these big gurus out there, they say, you know, you've got the 20-20-20 rule, right? So if we break up our minute into 20 minutes of feeling, 20 seconds of feeling, 20 seconds of thinking, and 20 seconds of doing, there you have your minute.
That's right.
So
Also,
perhaps
the impulse is there, like the impulse to open the eye and peek a little. And that's a thing, like we all have agency. The breath really gives us an opportunity to say, I really want to open and see, but you know what? I'm just going to take a breath and let that impulse sort of fly by. Trust me, I have impulses all the time. I have an impulse right now to go open my refrigerator and eat a chocolate cake, but I can breathe and I can short circuit that. Yeah.
Judge Lynn, one thing you said also this week in your social media was that you told a small story of the importance of being nice to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that maybe you could kind of, give us some last minute tips on when you have impulses and, you still have to find the urge to have courage and be kind. How do you just take it in for yourself and just keep being nice?
I'm not really sure. I was raised with that concept that you always should be. My mother used to always say, everybody's got a boatload of crap they're trying to get through. Be slow to anger, because everybody's fighting their own little fight and what they need to do. And I think especially in this day and age, when we've got the ability to disseminate our impulses to the world with a click of a button, we should have on Twitter should have both a breathalyzer on it and a little floating message. Are you sure?
And a delay.
A moment on your mind, forever on the net. Is this really what you looking to do? Because we're creating a culture of, I'm gonna jump on you and slam you, and it feels good getting in with the crowd. And if you do the best nasty, you get the most retweets, and it's impulse on jet fuel that is extraordinarily negative.
Yeah. Yep. So it's back to Judge Lynn's quote for just manage yourself, which it's playing on repeat in my head. It's like, it's not going away ever since we started this endeavor. Dr. Ish, what are some quick tips then for, managing yourself and controlling yourself and ultimately loving others who have trouble controlling themselves?
Yeah, I think that's hard, right? Especially if we've come up and that's not something we're used to doing. It feels weird. So I think most of us will do more for others than we will do for ourselves. When that comes, whether that's our romantic partner, whether that's family members, friends. And so imagine what you would say to your best friend if you saw them doing some stuff that was outside of the box, beyond the pale, that they needed to be gently checked or made aware of. What would you say to them? Say, hey, that's interesting how you do that. Hey, that's, have you ever noticed that every time you do A, then usually B happens right after that? I wonder how you're feeling in this moment, if the thing that you normally do helps you, whatever those words would, however gently, lovingly, kindly, tenderly, and sweetly you would say that to your best friend or your 10-year-old child. Say those things to yourself, right? Put yourself in that situation. This is what I would say to somebody who I care about. So now say those things to yourself when it comes to your attention, and be just as patient, just as kind, just as gentle, just as tender, just as sweet, because a lot of us will treat others a lot more kindly than we will ever talk to and treat ourselves.
Yeah, and I put some of those resources. You can find them on the At Life Love and Lessons Facebook and on the Instagram for resources with impulse control disorders, and also some of those same steps to kind of really just be mindful of the importance of, avoiding blame and really making people aware of what they're doing. So tonight we just wanted to talk to you all about impulsivity, when you just can't stop yourself and it seems to be ruining your life. And I just like to say that sometimes it's just a good idea to think about what you want from a situation and try to get that rather than just blurting out the first thing that comes into your head. And to close it all out, I'd really just like to thank all of you for being a part of this. And for everyone who's listening, hear this loud and clear. Never give a person a piece of your mind when all you really wanted to do was give them a piece of your heart.
Words. All those nasty words, I can't take them back. Shooting arrows into your heart. heart. Oh, scream. It's all we ever do. I'm yelling back at you. I'm telling you this tears us apart. Maybe